Clara had always believed that life would go on as it always had, with a rhythm, a sense of certainty, and familiarity. For nearly 50 years, she and Robert had walked side by side through the seasons of life, raising children, celebrating anniversaries, and making memories that were stitched together with laughter, small conversations, and quiet moments of understanding. Their home, tucked in a quiet neighborhood with rows of trees lining the streets, was always filled with warmth. Robert was a man who had an easy smile and a hearty laugh. Clara often joked that he could light up a room just by entering it. His presence was like the gentle hum of a song that never ended, always there, always comforting. Together, they had built a life that was rich in love and in simple pleasures. The kitchen always smelled of fresh coffee in the morning, the television was tuned to the evening news, and their garden bloomed with colors that seemed to reflect their years of happiness together. But then, suddenly, everything changed. It was in the quiet of early spring when Clara first noticed Robert's health beginning to falter. It wasn't a sudden event, but the slow, inevitable decline that had started with a simple cough, a bit of fatigue. As days passed, Robert grew weaker. Clara, ever the caretaker, made sure to arrange doctor's visits, track medication schedules, and keep his spirits high. But the reality of it all began to settle in slowly, like the steady fade of a setting sun. The doctors were gentle with their words but clear in their message. Robert's illness was not something they could fight anymore. The treatments were no longer working, and the time they had left was uncertain. Clara was devastated. She'd always known that life could be fleeting, but the thought of losing Robert was an unthinkable reality. During those final weeks, Clara did everything she could to hold on. She took on the role of both the nurturer and the protector, supporting Robert as he spent more time in bed, but also watching helplessly as he slipped further away. The house, once full of movement, began to grow quieter. Robert no longer moved through the hallways with his familiar gait. The conversations between them became softer, tinged with unspoken sadness. There were still moments of tenderness, holding his hand as they sat together in the living room, sharing stories from their past, and reminiscing about the good old days, but they also began to speak in a language of finality, knowing their time was running out. Clara would sit beside him at night, the silence between them stretching out as they both gazed at the fading light through the window. She would stroke his hand gently, a tear slipping down her cheek, though she never let him see it. The unspoken truth was clear. The world they had built together was slowly dissolving, like a favorite old song that was coming to an end. The morning Robert passed away, Clara felt a strange, empty stillness settle over the house. There was no dramatic moment, no loud crash or sudden shift. It was simply the quiet, the absence of his breath beside her, the moment when she knew, without a doubt, that he was gone. Her heart broke in an instant. The house, which had once echoed with life, felt unbearably silent. For the first time in years, Clara didn't know what to do with herself. The rhythms of her life had been lost. She wandered through the house in a fog, the morning light now a harsh reminder of the space that Robert used to fill. The coffee sat untouched in the kitchen, the television played in the background with no one to watch, and the garden outside, once so vibrant, felt cold and distant. The woman who had spent so many years caring for others now found herself adrift, a ship without a rudder, unsure of where to go or how to move forward. In the days that followed Robert's passing, Clara found herself in a house that felt too big, too quiet, too empty. It was the kind of silence that seemed to settle into the corners of every room, pressing in on her from all sides. At first, she kept herself busy with mundane tasks, folding laundry, dusting the bookshelves, reorganizing the pantry. These were things she had done countless times, but now they felt like nothing more than small distractions from the overwhelming reality that everything had changed. Clara would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup of coffee, the one that had always been Robert's. He had liked his coffee black and strong, and the cup now sat on the table as if waiting for him to return. Every time she looked at it, she felt a pang in her chest. The rhythm of the mornings that had once been filled with laughter and the gentle clink of dishes now felt like an empty ritual. She would sometimes talk to herself, her voice sounding foreign in the room, just to break the silence. But even her own voice wasn't enough to fill the void. She wandered through the house, finding herself drawn to the places where they had spent so much time together. The couch in the living room, where they had watched their favorite shows for years, now sat unused. The chair beside it, once a familiar place for Robert to rest after work, was now an empty space that Clara couldn't bring herself to touch. She had always loved the sound of his footsteps across the floor, his voice calling to her from the other room. Now, there was only the sound of her own footsteps, echoing softly in the emptiness. The evenings were the hardest. The house, once filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the glow of television light, now felt still, almost suffocating. Clara would sit alone in the living room, the shadows growing longer, and the stillness would press in on her from all sides. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder in the quiet, each second stretching into eternity. She would glance at the phone, but no one called. Her children lived far away, busy with their own families, and though they checked in often, it wasn't the same. They had their lives to live, their own routines. Clara didn't want to burden them with her loneliness, so she kept it to herself, hiding behind the pretense of being fine even though she felt anything but. As the weeks passed, Clara's isolation grew. She found herself waking up in the morning with a sense of dread. The same silence that filled her house seemed to seep into her heart, making it hard to find any joy in the things she used to love. She had always been an avid reader, but now, the pages of her books seemed to blur together. Cooking, something she once enjoyed, now felt like a chore. The kitchen that had once been a place of shared meals and laughter with Robert was now a place she entered only out of necessity. The weight of the silence was like a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. It wasn't just the quiet in the house, it was the quiet in her soul. She found herself questioning if she would ever feel alive again. Could she ever find happiness in the small moments like she had before? Would the laughter she had shared with Robert ever return, or had it all left with him? There were days when Clara would walk to the window, looking out at the world as it carried on without her. The neighbors' children played in their yards, and life seemed to move on, unaffected by the great loss that had shaken her world. She would watch the seasons change, the leaves turning colors, the flowers blooming, but it all felt distant, as if she was watching from behind a glass. She couldn't seem to find her way back into life, at least, not yet. At night, Clara would often lie in bed, staring up at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep, not really. Her mind would race with memories of Robert, their first date, their wedding day, the way he held her hand when they were young, the way they had spent decades side by side. All those memories were precious, but now they felt like ghosts, haunting her in the stillness of the night. She longed for the comfort of his voice, the simple joy of his presence. But instead, there was only the silence, a silence that seemed to grow louder with each passing day. One afternoon, several months after Robert's passing, Clara was sitting at her kitchen table, staring blankly at a letter that had just arrived. It was an invitation to a book club meeting at the local library. The simple, printed words on the card seemed so out of place in her life now, an invitation to gather with strangers, to talk about books, to share thoughts and opinions. Clara hadn't thought much about socializing since Robert had passed. The days felt like a blur, and the idea of stepping outside of her comfort zone, of being around people again, filled her with dread. She turned the card over in her hands, reading it again. The words seemed friendly enough, a gentle invitation to a group of people meeting to discuss a novel. Clara had always loved books, had always found comfort in the pages of a good story. But could she really go? It felt like too much, too soon, too unfamiliar, too lonely. Her first instinct was to toss the invitation aside, to forget about it and continue with her life as it was, quiet, safe, and predictable. But then, she caught herself. "Isn't that what I've been doing all this time?" she thought. She had been hiding away from the world, wrapping herself in the silence of grief. She had closed herself off from everything and everyone, not because she wanted to, but because it felt easier to retreat than to face the world without Robert. But wasn't there more to life than just existing in a quiet, empty space? Wasn't there a part of her that missed being part of something, of feeling connected to others? It had been so long since she had laughed with someone outside of her family, since she had felt a spark of joy in a conversation. And maybe, just maybe, this book club could be the chance for her to rediscover that. Clara took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number listed on the invitation. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but she was relieved when a friendly voice on the other end answered. The woman was warm and welcoming, and before Clara knew it, she had signed up to attend the next meeting. The day of the meeting arrived quickly. Clara had spent hours deciding what to wear, as though her clothes would somehow make her feel more at ease. She settled on a soft sweater and a pair of comfortable jeans, her usual go-to when she wasn't sure what to wear. The morning light filtered through the window as she prepared herself for what felt like an enormous step. As she walked toward the library, Clara felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She hadn't been out in public like this in months, hadn't spoken to people who weren't family members or close friends. She couldn't remember the last time she had socialized with anyone outside her own home. What if they're all so much younger than me? What if I don't have anything in common with them? What if they think I'm strange or too old to be there? The doubts crept in, but Clara pushed them aside. "It's never too late," she whispered to herself, the mantra she had heard so many times but had yet to fully believe. Just go. See what happens. When she entered the library, Clara was surprised by how friendly and inviting the atmosphere felt. There was no judgment in the air, only a group of people gathered around a table, some with books in hand, others chatting about life. The members ranged in age, from young adults to older folks, and they were all engaged in conversation, laughing and sharing thoughts on the book they had read. Clara hesitated for a moment at the door, but then a woman spotted her. "You must be Clara. Welcome. We're so glad you could join us today," the woman said, with a warmth that immediately put Clara at ease. She was introduced to the group and offered a seat at the table. As she settled in, Clara felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in a long time. People were genuinely interested in hearing what she had to say, and as the discussion began, she found herself sharing her thoughts on the book. At first, her voice felt shaky, unsure of itself, but as the conversation continued, Clara found herself relaxing. She was surrounded by people who valued her opinions, who were eager to listen. It was the kind of connection she hadn't realized she was missing. Clara spoke about the themes in the book, drawing from her own life experiences. She was surprised by how much she had to contribute, how her years of reading and reflecting had shaped her perspective. The group responded with nods and smiles, and for the first time in a long time, Clara felt a spark of joy, something that hadn't existed in her life since the loss of Robert. The discussion flowed easily, and soon Clara was laughing, exchanging stories with others about their favorite books, their lives, and the things that made them happy. The weight of the silence she had been carrying for months began to lift, replaced by the warmth of new connections and the joy of shared experiences. When the meeting ended, Clara walked out of the library with a feeling she hadn't had in a long time, a feeling of lightness. For the first time in months, she didn't feel quite as alone in the world. She had rediscovered something important, that it wasn't too late to find new friends, new experiences, and new joys. And that, perhaps, this unexpected invitation had been the very thing she needed to begin opening her heart to life again. As Clara walked out of the library that first evening, something inside her shifted. The air felt different, fresher, somehow, as though the world had subtly opened up to her again. The conversations, the laughter, and the warmth of the people she had just met stayed with her long after she left the library. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on her chest. Instead, she felt lighter, as though a small but significant piece of the life she had lost was slowly coming back. Over the next few days, Clara found herself reflecting on the book club meeting. She remembered the stories she had shared, how her thoughts had been heard, and how the group had genuinely appreciated her presence. That feeling of being seen and valued was something she had long forgotten. In those quiet months after Robert's passing, she had become accustomed to being alone, to filling her days with small tasks and distractions. But the book club had reminded her that there was more to life than just existing. There was connection, there was community, and there was joy to be found in the simplest of things. It wasn't just the books that drew Clara back each week, it was the people. She found herself looking forward to those meetings, eager to hear the stories of others, to learn about their lives, and to share her own experiences. The members of the group came from all walks of life. Some were retirees, others were young professionals, and some were in the midst of raising families. Each person brought something unique to the table, but they all had one thing in common: a love of stories, of words, of connecting with others. It was a place where age didn't matter, where the only thing that counted was the shared experience of being human. Clara had always been an introvert, content to stay in the background and listen rather than be the center of attention. But something in the group made her feel comfortable enough to step forward, to share pieces of herself she hadn't realized she was still holding on to. As she spoke about her favorite books, her life with Robert, and the memories they had created together, she felt her heart open in ways it hadn't in years. The act of sharing, of being part of something bigger than herself, was a healing experience. And with each meeting, Clara felt a little bit more like herself again. It wasn't just the conversations at the book club that began to change her life, it was the other activities she started to embrace as well. After weeks of meeting the book club members, some of them suggested she join a local painting class. Clara hesitated at first. She had always admired art but never thought of herself as artistic. What if I'm no good? She wondered. What if I embarrass myself? But the same voice that had encouraged her to attend the book club meeting now pushed her to take this next step. It's never too late, she whispered to herself again, reminding herself that life was about growth, about trying new things even if they were outside her comfort zone. The first painting class was a revelation. Clara was amazed at how freeing it felt to pick up a paintbrush, to let her creativity flow without any pressure or judgment. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about expressing herself, about embracing the beauty of the present moment. She had always admired Robert's artistic skills, his ability to capture the world with a simple pencil or brush, and now, for the first time, she felt like she was connecting with that part of herself, too. The act of painting gave her a sense of calm, a way to express her emotions without words. It wasn't just painting that brought new purpose into Clara's life. She began volunteering at the local senior center, helping to organize events and activities for other seniors in her community. At first, she felt unsure of herself, There was so much she didn't know, so many new faces to meet. But with time, Clara found that she had more to offer than she had realized. Her experience, her wisdom, and her ability to connect with others were valuable gifts that helped brighten the lives of those around her. And in turn, the friendships she formed in the senior center gave her a renewed sense of belonging and purpose. One afternoon, Clara took a walk through the park, a park she and Robert had visited countless times over the years. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly, the leaves rustling in the breeze. As she walked, Clara realized something profound. She no longer felt burdened by the weight of grief. The pain of losing Robert would always be a part of her, but she had learned to live alongside it, to find joy even in the midst of sorrow. The park, which had once felt like a place of memories and sadness, now felt like a place of renewal, a symbol of the new chapter she was beginning to write. The small changes in her life, joining the book club, painting, volunteering, had come together to create a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. Clara had rediscovered the beauty of connection, of doing things that brought her joy, and of embracing the unexpected moments that life had to offer. She realized that, although her life had been deeply altered by the loss of Robert, there was still so much to be experienced, so much to give. And as Clara walked home that day, with the sunlight warming her face and a sense of peace in her heart, she couldn't help but smile. She had found her way back to herself, and it felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was truly living again. As Clara continued to attend the book club, take painting classes, and volunteer at the senior center, something remarkable began to happen. The quiet, empty spaces in her life that had once felt unbearable began to fill with new connections, new experiences, and new relationships. She had entered this phase of her life with a heart heavy with grief, unsure if she would ever truly feel whole again. But now, as the weeks passed, Clara started to realize something she hadn't fully understood before, that she was capable of rebuilding her life, of finding love and connection in places she never expected. One Tuesday morning, after a particularly lively book club discussion, Clara found herself lingering by the door, chatting with a woman named Evelyn. Evelyn had a spark in her eyes, a quick wit, and a deep love for mystery novels. She was around Clara's age, but there was a youthful energy about her that seemed to draw others in. Clara had noticed Evelyn before, but that day, the conversation felt different. It wasn't just about books, it was about life, about what they had both experienced, about the losses they had faced and the ways they had found to carry on. "I know it's not easy, starting over," Evelyn said with a knowing smile, "but sometimes, you find that the best things come after the hardest times. I never imagined I'd be making new friends at my age, but here I am. And honestly, I think it's the best thing that's happened to me in a long while." Clara listened, surprised by how much of her own story resonated with Evelyn's words. There was something so comforting about this woman, someone who understood the ache of loss but also understood the power of rebuilding. That conversation lingered in Clara's heart, and from then on, she found herself seeking out more moments to talk with Evelyn, to share stories, and to simply be in the presence of someone who understood. Over time, their friendship blossomed. They began to meet for coffee after book club meetings, and soon, they started walking together in the mornings, just the two of them, talking about anything and everything. Evelyn spoke of her own life, her children who lived far away, and the deep sense of isolation she had felt after the death of her husband. Clara shared her own story, the quiet house, the overwhelming silence, and the fear of stepping back into a world that had once felt so full and now felt so empty. Through these conversations, Clara began to realize that she wasn't alone. There were others in her community, others who had faced their own struggles, their own losses, and who, like her, had come out the other side. And in their shared experiences, Clara found not just comfort, but hope. In addition to her deepening friendship with Evelyn, Clara's involvement in the senior center also blossomed. She had started volunteering there to help organize activities, but soon, she found herself drawn into the lives of the people she was helping. There was George, a widower who had a passion for woodworking, Sarah, who taught gentle yoga classes, and Millie, who ran the knitting group. Each of them had their own stories, their own battles with loneliness, their own moments of grief. But they also had something else in common: the determination to keep moving forward, to find joy in the little things, and to build a life once again. One afternoon, Clara helped organize a craft fair at the senior center. It was the first event of its kind, and Clara wasn't sure what to expect. But as the day unfolded, she was filled with a sense of pride. The room buzzed with activity as members of the senior center displayed their homemade crafts, from knitted scarves to painted pots, and even intricate wood carvings. Clara stood at the center of it all, her heart swelling with gratitude for the community she had become a part of. She had not only found a place where she belonged, but she had helped create something meaningful, something that brought people together, something that allowed them to shine. After the fair, George, who had become a dear friend, pulled Clara aside. "You know, Clara, you've brought something really special to this place," he said, his eyes filled with appreciation. "We all lost a part of ourselves when our loved ones left, but you've shown us that it's possible to rebuild, to find joy again. Thank you." Clara didn't know how to respond. She had never seen herself as someone who could rebuild anyone else's life. But standing there, surrounded by the people she had come to care about, Clara realized that by opening her heart again, by allowing herself to connect with others, she had helped to rebuild her own life, and perhaps, in some small way, helped others do the same. And then there was the park, the place where she and Robert had once spent so many quiet afternoons. Clara had returned there several times in the past few months, but now it felt different. As she walked through the park, she no longer felt like an outsider in her own life. The bench where they used to sit, the path they used to walk together, no longer felt like places of sadness. They had become symbols of the love they had shared, and the life Clara was now learning to embrace once again. One day, as she sat on the same bench, watching the children play in the distance, Clara realized that she had come a long way. Her grief would always be a part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was, but it no longer defined her. She had rebuilt the bonds that had once felt broken, and she had found a new sense of purpose, a purpose not rooted in the past, but in the present and in the future. Clara smiled softly to herself. She was no longer just surviving, she was living again. Clara's life had transformed in ways she could have never predicted when she first stepped into the book club months ago. The journey of grief, loneliness, and fear had slowly been replaced by a sense of renewal, connection, and purpose. With each new experience, Clara had begun to embrace the idea that it was never too late to begin again. And while the pain of losing Robert would never disappear, Clara had discovered that life could still hold meaning, still hold beauty, even after profound loss. One crisp morning, as Clara sat at her kitchen table, sipping her coffee, she took a moment to reflect on how far she had come. It was a quiet moment, but it was filled with gratitude. She thought about the friends she had made, the activities she had embraced, and the way her days now felt full, even if they weren't as loud and bustling as they had been when Robert was by her side. She had found a new rhythm, a new sense of belonging that wasn't rooted in the past, but in the present. And that realization filled her with a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. The senior center was now a second home to her. She had not only continued to help organize events, but had also taken on a leadership role in planning a weekly creative writing group. It was something she had never considered doing before, but the idea of encouraging others to find their voices, just as she had found hers, seemed to resonate deeply with Clara. She was creating a space where others could share their stories, their experiences, and their creativity, just as she had done in the book club and painting class. She was no longer just a participant, she was a guide, helping others to open their hearts and find joy in the act of creation. And yet, as much as Clara had embraced this new chapter in her life, there was still one part of her journey she had not yet fully explored: the possibility of love. It was a thought that had crossed her mind from time to time, particularly on evenings when the house felt especially empty, or when she saw couples walking hand in hand down the street. The idea of loving again, of opening her heart to someone new, was both exciting and terrifying. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, or if it was even something she wanted. After all, Robert had been her world for so long. Could she possibly find room for another? Could she allow herself to feel that kind of connection again? One afternoon, as Clara sat with Evelyn at their favorite coffee shop, they had a conversation that gently nudged Clara toward that question. Evelyn had always been a voice of encouragement in her life, and that day, her words carried a weight Clara couldn't ignore. "You know, Clara," Evelyn said, "I know it might feel impossible to even think about it, but love is one of those things that doesn't have a timeline. We can love deeply, and we can lose that love, but that doesn't mean our capacity for it ever disappears. You might be surprised how much room your heart has. And I think you deserve to feel that kind of joy again." Clara didn't respond right away. She hadn't really thought about it in those terms, not seriously. But Evelyn's words stayed with her long after their conversation ended. Could it be that she was ready for something new? Could she possibly allow herself to experience the vulnerability and beauty of love once more? The thought didn't overwhelm her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet curiosity. She didn't need to rush into anything. Love, after all, wasn't something to force. It would come in its own time, if it was meant to. But perhaps, just perhaps, she had more room in her heart than she had realized. One day, several weeks later, Clara took a walk through the park, the same park where she had once sat alone, mourning the loss of Robert. She had walked this path many times since then, but today, something was different. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the trees, and for the first time in a long time, Clara wasn't walking with the weight of her grief hanging over her. She wasn't walking with a sense of loss or longing. She was walking with a quiet sense of peace, of acceptance. It was as though the park had become a symbol of her own growth, a place where she had learned to embrace both her past and her future. As she rounded a corner, Clara noticed someone sitting on a bench near the fountain. It was George, the woodworker from the senior center. He had a kind, gentle way about him that Clara had always appreciated. He had lost his wife several years ago, and they had often shared stories of their spouses, their joys, and their heartaches. Over time, a friendship had formed between them, one based on mutual respect and shared understanding. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" George said as Clara approached. Clara smiled. "It really is. It's hard to believe how much things can change in just a few months." George nodded. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" They sat together in silence for a few moments, simply watching the sunset. Then, George spoke again, his voice quiet but sincere. "Clara, I want you to know that I think you're an incredible person. You've helped me in ways you may not even realize. And I hope you know that you're not alone in this world. Not now, not ever." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. There was a comfort in knowing that she was not alone, that the people she had met along her journey were there, willing to walk beside her as she continued to rebuild her life. There was a deep connection between them now, one that went beyond grief and loss. It was a connection based on respect, understanding, and a shared willingness to embrace the future. As they continued to talk, Clara realized that love wasn't something she needed to seek out or force. It would find its own way into her life, in its own time, whether as a friendship or something deeper. For now, she was content to simply be open to the possibilities, to embrace the future with the same curiosity and courage that had helped her rediscover her life after loss. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Clara smiled softly to herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: it was never too late to begin again. To live fully. To love. To find joy. And that, in itself, was a beautiful thing. As the months passed, Clara's life continued to evolve in ways that brought her joy and fulfillment. She had built new routines, found new friendships, and embraced the idea that it was never too late to open her heart to the world once more. But even as she moved forward, Clara never lost sight of the love she had shared with Robert. The memories of their life together remained an integral part of her, and she carried them with her, not as a weight to bear, but as a legacy that had shaped who she was and how she saw the world. One afternoon, Clara found herself in the attic, sorting through boxes of old photographs, keepsakes, and mementos. It was something she had avoided for months, the act of revisiting their shared history. The thought of it had felt too overwhelming, too tied to the grief she had worked so hard to move beyond. But today, something felt different. The sadness wasn't as sharp, and the memories weren't as painful. Instead, Clara felt a quiet warmth as she pulled out the old photo albums, each one a testament to a life well lived, a life full of love, laughter, and shared moments. As she flipped through the pages, Clara smiled at the pictures of Robert, his mischievous grin, the way his eyes sparkled when he told a joke, the way he held her close in family photos, their love so apparent even in the simplest moments. There were photos from their travels, from family gatherings, from quiet Sundays spent at home. Each image was a thread in the fabric of their life together, a life that, while it had ended, had left a lasting imprint on her heart. But as Clara looked at those photos, she realized something profound. Robert's love wasn't just something of the past, it was still alive within her. It was woven into the fabric of who she had become and was now shaping her journey forward. She wasn't letting go of him, she was honoring his memory by living her life fully, by finding new connections, by opening herself to new possibilities. His legacy was not one of loss and grief, but one of resilience, of the deep and enduring love they had shared, which continued to fuel her own ability to move forward. Inspired by this realization, Clara decided to take a step she had long considered but never had the courage to act on. She wanted to share her journey with others. She had always believed in the power of stories, how they could heal, inspire, and create connections. And now, with all the lessons she had learned along the way, she felt compelled to share her own story. She began writing. At first, it was just short reflections, bits and pieces of her journey that had felt too personal to share before. But soon, she began to write more about the loss of Robert, about the grief that had threatened to consume her, about the small steps she had taken to rebuild her life, and about the love that still remained in her heart. She wrote about the people who had supported her, the moments that had brought her joy, and the new beginnings she had embraced. In writing, Clara found not just a way to process her feelings, but a way to connect with others who had walked similar paths. Clara shared her writings with Evelyn, George, and the other friends she had made through the senior center. They were touched by her words, and each one encouraged her to take the next step, to share her story more widely. It was terrifying at first, the thought of opening up to strangers, but Clara took the leap. She began submitting articles to local newspapers, writing pieces about resilience, healing, and the importance of finding purpose after loss. She also shared her story at the Senior Center, inspiring others with her journey of rediscovery. Over time, Clara's story reached a broader audience. Her articles were published online, in newsletters, and even in books about aging and personal growth. People from all over the country wrote to her, sharing their own stories of loss, grief, and renewal. Clara had never imagined that her journey could touch so many lives, but in sharing her truth, she had found a new purpose, one that felt deeply fulfilling and profoundly meaningful. And then, one day, while Clara was volunteering at the Senior Center, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from a woman named Margaret, who had recently lost her husband after many years of marriage. Margaret had read one of Clara's articles and had been deeply moved by it. The letter was filled with gratitude, telling Clara how her words had given Margaret the strength to take her own first steps toward healing. The letter ended with a simple phrase, "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to find joy again." Clara sat down to read the letter, tears in her eyes. It was the kind of letter she had never expected to receive, but it was exactly what she had hoped for, a reminder that her journey, her story, had the power to impact others. It was a legacy of love and resilience, one that would live on far beyond her own lifetime, carried by the countless people whose hearts had been touched by the lessons she had learned along the way. In that moment, Clara understood something deeply. She understood that love, true, lasting love, was never truly gone. It lived on in the people we meet, in the lives we touch, in the stories we share. And in sharing her own story, Clara had not only honored the memory of Robert, but she had also built something beautiful, a legacy of hope, of strength, and of the belief that, no matter what life throws our way, it's never too late to begin again. As time continued to pass, Clara's life became a beautiful tapestry of growth, connections, and quiet moments of contentment. The grief that had once consumed her was no longer an overwhelming presence in her life. Instead, it had softened into something more manageable, something she could carry with her as part of her story, but not something that defined her every day. Clara had learned how to live with both the love she had lost and the love she had found in herself and others. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about integrating it into her life in a way that allowed her to move forward. Her work with the creative writing group at the Senior Center had flourished. More and more people had joined, eager to share their own stories, and the group had become a sanctuary for many of them. Clara felt deeply fulfilled by the connections she had made and the encouragement she offered to those who were still trying to find their voice. Her own writing had expanded, too. What started as simple reflections about her journey through grief had evolved into a full-length memoir, one that told the story of love, loss, renewal, and resilience. When the book was finally published, Clara was overwhelmed by the response. Letters poured in from people across the country, each person sharing how her story had touched their heart and helped them navigate their own struggles. But it wasn't the accolades or the recognition that brought Clara the most joy, it was the knowledge that her words had made a difference in someone else's life. She had always believed in the power of stories to heal and connect, but now, she saw it firsthand. Every letter, every message of gratitude, reminded her that her journey had a purpose greater than herself. In sharing her experiences, she had created a ripple effect, touching others and offering them hope when they needed it most. One sunny afternoon, as Clara sat by the window, sipping tea and reflecting on everything she had experienced, she felt a deep sense of peace. It was as though a gentle calm had settled over her life, a peace that wasn't born of avoiding hardship but of accepting that life, with all its ups and downs, was worth living fully. She didn't need to have all the answers, and she didn't need to have everything figured out. What mattered was that she was living in the present, embracing the beauty of the world around her, and cherishing the relationships she had built along the way. Clara had also found a sense of peace in the quiet moments. In the mornings, she often walked to the park, not as an escape from her past, but as a place where she could simply be. The park had become a sanctuary for her, a place of reflection, a place where the past and future merged into one. She would sit on the same bench where she and Robert had once sat, watching the world go by, feeling the soft breeze on her face, and knowing that it was okay to simply exist, without the need for grand accomplishments or goals. The peace she had found in herself was enough. In these quiet moments, Clara also thought about the future, not with fear or uncertainty, but with curiosity. She had spent so much of her life focused on what she had lost, and now she was looking ahead to what might still be waiting for her. There were still so many things she wanted to experience, so many new places she wanted to see, so many new people she wanted to meet. She didn't have a specific plan, and that was okay. What mattered was that she was open to life's possibilities, willing to continue learning, growing, and discovering new joys. One evening, as Clara sat with Evelyn at their favorite cafe, sipping coffee and watching the world outside, Evelyn looked at her with a soft smile. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" she said. "I can't help but think back to the woman who walked into the book club that first day, unsure, hesitant. And now look at you." Clara chuckled, feeling a warm sense of gratitude toward her friend. "I suppose I have. But I couldn't have done it without the people around me. You, the book club, the people at the senior center, you've all helped me see that it's never too late to start over, to find joy, to rebuild." Evelyn raised her cup in a silent toast. "To new beginnings," she said softly. "To new beginnings," Clara echoed, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She had truly embraced the future, not as something to fear, but as a new chapter full of potential. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't matter. It was about integrating it into the person she had become, allowing it to guide her, but not hold her back. She had found a new balance, a new sense of peace. As Clara continued her journey, she was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. She had found the strength to rebuild her life after loss, and in doing so, she had discovered the kind of peace that comes from truly living in the moment. It wasn't about seeking perfection or chasing after some ideal version of happiness. It was about being present, appreciating the small moments, and knowing that, no matter what age you are, there is always room for growth, joy, and new experiences. And in the stillness of those peaceful moments, Clara realized that her journey was far from over. It was a continuous evolution, a path that would unfold with time. And she was more than ready to walk it, with all the love, resilience, and peace she had gathered along the way.